Alrighty, well, we are going to jump into the book of James again for this episode. We're nearing the end of the book of James, probably just this lesson, maybe one or two more, but not that many. And James is really, in this last section of 4, in the beginning of section of 5, he's really starting to ramp up his rhetoric that he's using towards the rich people. I mean, really, there's really no other way to parse it. He's using a lot of harsh language in chapter 5 in particular. And he really kind of attacks, too, the kind of the mentality behind pursuing wealth at the end of chapter 4, which we'll delve into a little bit. But right at the outset, I would encourage you, if you are watching this and you've enjoyed these teachings or enjoyed some of the other ones, please, wherever you're listening or watching, hit subscribe. Like this video, maybe share this video on social media with a comment of what you liked about it. Comment in the comment section if you're watching it on YouTube. But really, or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, subscribe, give me a 5-star rating, and just say something in the comments of, in your review of what you like. Maybe you just think that I'm kind of a funny looking guy and you want to comment that. That's fine. But either way, subscribing, rating, commenting, liking, all these things really do help kind of boost the audience and get that algorithm going and get the podcast out to other people. So I would really appreciate that. And as you can see, the ticker's going across the bottom, that if you'd like to support this ministry financially, you could. But if you can't support financially, I totally understand. If you're listening to this, that is a way of supporting. You may not be putting finances towards this teaching in this ministry, but you're supporting it through just giving me your time, and I appreciate that. Well, another way you could support, it's not going to cost you anything, except for maybe another 30 seconds, is to do those things. Subscribe, maybe share it on social media with a comment, maybe share it in a message or a text message to somebody if this speaks to somebody that you know personally or one of these episodes have spoken to, and you can just share it with them personally. It's just a way of kind of being an ambassador and getting the message that's being shared here out to other people. So I really do appreciate that, and I appreciate your time that you're giving to this teaching. So let us just jump right into the text. We are in the end of chapter 4. So we got up through about verse 12 last time, and we'll start in just verse 13. He says, "Come now," which is kind of a very popular transitional phrase that James likes to use. And he's now addressing this kind of new audience. Come now, you who say. So he's targeting a specific group of people who have a specific mentality and kind of a philosophy of life. It says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow, we will go into this town or that town and spend a year there and do business and make a profit. You do not know about tomorrow. What is your life like? For you are a puff of smoke that appears for a short time and then vanishes." James likes to use this kind of imagery, right? "You ought to say instead, if the Lord is willing, then we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil." And we'll drop off that last verse and come back to that here in a second. So he's addressing people with a certain mentality. Come now, you rich people, you people who have this mentality. I mean, he doesn't imply rich, or he doesn't say rich, but it's kind of this implication. I mean, if you're a business owner and you're traveling around from here to there, you're probably somebody who's making a fair chunk of money. You're probably not completely destitute. So he's easing into the audience he's really going to lambast at the end, the beginning of chapter 5. But he says, to you who say this, or some variation of this, that today or tomorrow we're going to go into this town, we're going to do that, we're going to have this plan, we do this, we'll go here, we'll make money, we'll invest there. All these different kinds of things. We have all of these plans. And with the goal of making money and making a profit. Now, of course, making profits there's nothing inherently wrong with making a profit. I mean, especially if you own a business, you have to make a profit. Otherwise, guess what happens? You no longer own a business and you make no profit. So there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And that's not really what James is attacking, right? He's attacking the attitude behind what these people are saying. And this is where I think that we err when we look at this verse and we say, "Oh, that's evil." See, James is attacking the fact that these people are making plans. And I don't think anything could be further from the truth. And it's not even really that they're making plans to make lots of money. That's not even really what James is concerned about. It's the fact that they're making plans autonomously, meaning without God in the driver's seat. They're not factoring God into their plans at all. And that really is at the heart of the problem. So now, remember, this is nearing the end of James's letter. And what has been his point throughout this whole epistle? It's been one of he's writing to his audience who is suffering. They're struggling. They're mostly probably all poor and destitute and just struggling to survive. They're Jewish people living in the Gentile world, and they're ostracized from the Gentiles, and they're ostracized from the Jewish community of people who don't follow Jesus as the Messiah. So they're getting it from both ends. I mean, there's persecution from all around. So, of course, in the midst of that, any rational person has to be thinking, how in the world can I better my life? How in the world can I get out of this situation? I mean, and it's not unwise. If you're in a situation where you're riddled with poverty, you're riddled with suffering, it's not wrong to be thinking, how do I get out of this situation? In fact, the Proverbs is littered with examples of foolish people who are suffering. They're getting rods beaten over their back. They're constantly falling into sin that they should have seen coming. They're constantly falling into problems and poverty and all these kinds of things. And Solomon in the book of Proverbs is saying, you're a fool. You should be making wise steps and wise plans to be getting out of this. So there's nothing wrong with making these plans to try to get out of suffering. It's the fact that they're doing it without the guidance of the Lord. When he says, you ought to have done these same things, but said, if the Lord is willing, we will do this or that. And so I think it's really anti-spiritual to have this mentality that, I just don't make plans. I just trust the Lord. And I'm bad at this. I'm not a very, what you would call conscientious person, meaning I do fly by the seat of my pants a lot. And thankfully I have a job that by and large, my ministry, I'm not to say that I don't have insight, or insight, not that I don't have oversight from my bosses and leadership at InFaith. If I was doing nothing, that would be a problem. But they're not, I don't report to them every day. I don't have to send them a schedule of everything that I'm doing. So a lot of people are very conscientious. They will have their plans all laid out in Google Calendar and stuff. And to me, that's hard for me to do because I just think I have all this time. I can put stuff wherever I want, and I can do things wherever I want in the calendar. And so that's kind of hard for me. But some people have the mentality, and that's just a personality thing with me. I'm not attaching any spiritual significance to that other than to say that maybe I would be a little bit more better off making the plans than to just kind of, flying by the seat of my pants, so to speak. But some people think that, I just follow the Lord and I don't make any plans. I don't do any. I just follow wherever the Lord directs. That's it. And they might use a passage like this, right, to support what they're saying. That, you shouldn't have these plans. That's evil. That's sinful. That's wrong to do that. And I think that's the opposite of what James is trying to say. So we want to have plans. And when you look at the book of Acts, if you look at Paul's itinerary and his traveling and his missionary journeys, they're very well thought out. They're very well planned. And you can tell, even when you weave in his traveling with his letters, there is a plan and there is a reason for why he goes to certain places and why he doesn't go to other certain places. And you know this too, like of why he might want to get to, the city of Ephesus at a certain time of the year, because maybe the weather's going to be bad on the Mediterranean Ocean, and hey, traveling may not be easy on the Mediterranean, so let's try to get there before like the winter. He'll say things like that. I'm making it my effort to get there by the winter. Why does he stay in Ephesus? If he gets to Ephesus and he stays there for a year and a half, 2 years, why? Why is he spending a long time in Corinth? Well, there's plans behind it. There's a strategy. These are major cities that are hubs of trade and tourism, and people are coming in and out. It makes more sense just on a pragmatic level to try to get to those bigger cities, so then you can reach out into the smaller ones around. I'm nestled where I live right in between Flint and Lansing, two bigger cities. I mean, Michigan's not known for its huge cities, but kind of a little rural community in between these two major cities. And I love where I live, and I love to minister here. But if the Apostle Paul was coming, I wouldn't necessarily expect him to stop in my little community. Why? Well, because it's small. It would be much more effective to land in Lansing, the capital, or maybe Flint, a city, and minister there, and let people like myself from smaller communities go there to minister to him, be ministered by him and minister to him. So that makes more sense. You get more bang for your buck. So Paul's trying to maximize his time, and he's trying to maximize his travel expenditure. I mean, all of that stuff. It becomes very apparent. And I would love to read something or do a study by somebody who's very conscientious, who's like really a planner, who's really dissected Paul's travel and been like, you can see his plan and why he did this and where he went there, and it would take him this long to travel here. I'm sure that there's somebody out there in the body of Christ who's that obsessed with that kind of stuff that they've looked into those things. But the point being, there's purpose in what he's doing, and it's not aimless. In fact, he's open, and this is the part that I think James is hitting on. It's all kind of understood. Now, this is not to say that you always have to. I mean, like, what does James say here? He says, you should have said, if the Lord is willing, we will live and do this or that. So it's not that, it isn't that everything that you say, like, well, I'm going to have steak tomorrow if it's the Lord's will. Like, I mean, I think hopefully we get to a point in our lives where that's almost just kind of understood, where we walk with the Lord so much that it doesn't have to be explicitly stated. We are just open to the Lord changing our plans and adjusting what we have plans, and we're open to his sovereignty and his interaction in our life. And Paul was that. You can see before Paul went to the Thessalonians, he was up north of Israel and going up into Turkey, and he was really wanting to go over, or he was wanting to go up into Galatia north, and he was wanting to go east, and he was wanting to go all these different directions, and he just kept saying, this is to the Thessalonians, he just kept saying, we were forbidden. We weren't able to go that way. And then you look in the book of Acts, it was like the Lord was forbidding him. The Spirit was not allowing him to go to those places. And then he has this vision of way over in Macedonia of somebody saying, come over here. So that's where he went. So Paul had his plans of, I want to go here and I want to go there. But when God intervened and said, no, I want you to come this direction, then Paul was open to that. So I really think that for us, then practically, this is where our attitude should fall. We should, especially, I mean, again, in this section here that James is talking about, he's talking about somebody's business plans, how they're going to make money, how they're going to sell and sail over here and load up cargo over there and do all this kind of stuff. Major investments, major business decisions. I really think that a lot of the time, we in the church don't teach people, and maybe there should be more teaching about this and more of a theology around our career. It's a topic that we in the Bible study that I host at my house and at my local church, we try to talk about a lot. This idea that what we do with our career does matter. I mean, there are certain problems that come along with certain careers, and there's some challenges to ministry that might come along with certain careers and different career paths. But the point being, I think a lot of the times we as Christians have this mentality, sort of like what James is saying. We just have this plan. Okay, I'm gonna get through high school. I'm gonna get on the honor roll, and I'm gonna be involved in this sports thing, whatever. So football or basketball or soccer or whatever, so I can get a scholarship. I'm going to get a scholarship to this university. I'm going to go to this university, and I'm going to play on the team there, and I'm going to get this kind of a degree. And after 4 or 5 years, I'm going to have graduated. I'm going to hopefully land a job here doing this. And then after I get settled and established, I'll get married, and we kind of have these plans. And I think, unfortunately, other times is we never stop to ask God, is this actually your will for me? Because I think that we just have this mentality, and we have these little sayings in Christianity that taken in a certain light can be accurate, but then taken, if you look at it from another angle, it's like, well, is that really right? So sometimes we might say things like, and I can't remember who said it. It might have been like Augustine, I think, or something like that. That said, love God, love people, and then do what you want. And I understand the sentiment behind that. That's what we want to do. We want to love God, we want to love people, and then God is happy that we just if we put those other two things first, we can really do whatever we want. But I think if we abuse that saying and we don't ever what does it mean to love God? We say love God and love people. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, part of it should, at least in part, being checking in with God occasionally, thinking, okay, God, is this what you have for me? Am I on the right path? Am I doing the correct thing? Am I doing what you want for me? I went to a college that was a mission school, and I remember the ethos, the kind of the mentality of the school and the people there was basically like, you don't even need to pray if you should be going into missions, because God's marching orders are clear. Missions. You're going to missions. And it's like, I know a lot of people who went into missions and then ended up coming back. And I'm not to say that, I don't think when God says, go to missions, he means for the rest of your life. It could mean he could have somebody there for just a short period of time, for just a short season, and redirect. I'm not making a judgment call on any of that stuff. But I know a lot of people who went and then ended up coming back. And I know mission organizations as a whole have a terrible attrition rate of people who are sure that God wants them in missions, but then they come back home and they quit or they give up. Something happens, and it's like, I wonder sometimes. I'm suspicious, even in something as clearly as God honoring as missions. I just think, was the default thinking, well, sure, I'll go to missions. Why would God be upset with that? And there never was a questioning, God, is this actually what you want me to do? Is this the field you want me to go to? Is this the work you want me to be involved in? Or was it just a love God, love people, do what you want, and God's just happy to you do whatever you want? When in reality, we might be falling into this James 4 thing where we have these plans, we never ask God. Because think about Paul. When he's traveling, right? Come on. People in Ephesus, they need the gospel. People in Thessalonica, they need the gospel. People in northern Galatia, they need the gospel. What does it matter? Just go, Paul. But no, he was in tune with the Spirit to guide and direct. Where God wanted him was where God wanted him. So I think sometimes we default in the other direction. If we can think that way about missions, think about in other directions where people, they come up through high school, they have their plans to just go to college, they have their, and they're in church this whole time, and they're kind of almost encouraged to whatever it is that is on your mind to do. I want to go to this college. I want to get this degree. I want to go into this job. Hopefully at some point there's a family. And it's like, well, wait a second. Is that actually where God is directing you? Or is that just where you want to go? And your mentality is one of like, well, God, of course, God's going to come along for the ride. Like, he'll be here and I'm going to glorify God and doing all this kind of stuff. But there's never sometimes there's not a pause to ask, is this really what you want? If you've been a listener of Faith and Focus for a while, I would encourage you to become a supporter of the ministry by becoming a monthly donor. Your generous donations allow me to continue working within Faith and recording new content. You can find a link to my donation page in the show notes for this episode. Thank you. So instead, you should say, if the Lord is willing, then we'll live and do that. So, and James is already in this section. He's starting to basically hit on this idea that things are transitory, including wealth. What is your life? It's just a puff of smoke. It's just a vapor. So I almost wonder if James isn't hearkening back to the parable that Jesus told of the rich farmer. And you probably remember this, but if you don't, I'll kind of retell it to you. There's this farmer who had this barn and all these fields, and he fills up this barn, and he thinks, man, what am I going to do? Like this, my barn's full, and maybe he's got a bunch of other fields he still has to harvest. So he thinks, okay, well, here's what I'll do. I'm going to tear down this barn, and I'm going to build 7 new ones. So he's kind of like diversifying his stock portfolio, and he's going to maximize his profits. So he tears down the barn, builds 7 new barns, and then he fills those 7 barns up. And he says he just sits back and just tells himself, take it easy. You can retire now. You're financially secure. Now you can just have the rest of your life. And God says, you fool, this night your life is required of you. And who's going to get all these barns full of grain? It's all gone. So sometimes we think of like money as being transitory. We think, oh, there's security in money. If you just have wealth, but that could just be gone like that. Well, your life could be that. It might not be the money that goes away. You could go away. So I think that a lot of the times these things can just be hedged against if we just take the time to pray, God, what do you have for me? What do you want me to do? Direct my life. And I really do think that if you go back to Proverbs 3, where it talks about lean on the Lord and lean not unto your own understanding, in all of your ways acknowledge God, and he will direct your paths. So that's what I think. I'm not saying like every single thing that when you write down in your planner, I want to do this on that day, and then just have to write in the margins if the Lord's willing. But as you walk with the Lord, just having this as kind of the default mode in the back of your mind, right? That, okay, all of these plans are subject to change, but in all of your ways acknowledging him, okay, God, I'm in high school now. What do you have for me? What do you want for me? Of course, he probably wants you to go to school and, try to glorify him through not completely flaking out on all of your schoolwork. I don't think kids sloughing off and getting D's and F's and stuff like that in high school is probably very godly. But, God, what would you have for me in high school? Do you really want me to pursue the best grades, the best marks, all of the scholarships, or would you rather me invest in my fellow youth group members and build relationships with them? Wouldn't it be much more glorifying to God if a kid graduated from high school but had been discipled and was going into college with and able and capable to then enter into college and take part in leading other people to Christ and discipling people that he might meet in college? I mean, wouldn't that be a much better investment for the kingdom than to say, well, I got this great scholarship. Well, can you disciple? Can you teach the Bible? Well, I can't do any of that stuff. Maybe I'll pick that up later. I just think, why are we pursuing the things that we pursue? Is it just because we just default thinking, I'll do what I want, and then we'll kind of say Jesus, 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 and oh yeah, of course, yeah, Jesus is involved, thank you, Jesus, that kind of thing. Well, then the same thing gets perpetuated in college. Where are you going to go to college? For what degree, and why? And never sometimes does Christ ever factor into this, and you could be dead like that. You could be dead before you finish high school. You could be dead before you finish your degree. You could be dead before you get that job, that promotion, whatever it is that you're seeking and thinking, as soon as I get that, man, I'll be set and I can do this. And God's saying, come on, like, I know tomorrow, I know the future, I know what's going on. There's a light at the end of this tunnel. And you know what? It might be a train. Maybe we should prepare beforehand so God knows what's ahead. So maybe seeking him, asking him what he would have us do, that's probably kind of important. And of course, this is all in the context, too, of what James has been saying the whole way through. We're suffering. In this world, we are going to suffer, and we're going to have tribulations, and his audience is no different. They're suffering, they're struggling. The temptation is to lean on our own understanding and our own planning. I think we as people do this all the time. Well, oh man, I'm really struggling, so here's what I'll do. And I'll get back to the Jesus thing at some point, but right now I just got to dig myself out of this hole that I'm in. I got to plan to do this, and I got to do that, and I got to accomplish this, and here's what I'll do here. I'll work, 2 jobs to do this, and I'll get money here, and I'll plan. And we have all of these plans. In our mind, we have these good intentions that I will dig myself out of the suffering that I'm in, when here we've got God going all the way back to chapter 1. He's just saying, hey, ask me for wisdom. What do you want me to do? And remember, James says he will give it to you. So if we just put a pause on our planning and just think, okay, God, I know I'm suffering, and my tendency is to try to solve it by doing this and planning my own way out of this and my own understanding, but I want to lean on your wisdom and let you direct me out of this. And then we will mature and grow and come out stronger on the other side. But if we lean on our own wisdom and try to get out of it in our own way, we're going to short circuit. We might get out of suffering. But we will have done it by circumventing the way that God wants us to do it. So then he says this classic verse at 4:17. So whoever knows what is good to do and does not do it is guilty of sin. So again, we kind of take that always to just talk about sins of omission. You omit to do the right thing, and that's certainly true. If God's telling you, hey, I want you to do this thing, and you don't do it, that's a sin. That's a sin of omission. You know the right thing to do, and you don't do it. We tend to think, well, I'm not committing a sin. It's not a sin of commission. Well, this is a sin of omission. It's just as bad. And it's sometimes they're even more devastating. The thing, not doing the thing that you should have done, sometimes is worse than the things that we do. But specifically what James is talking about is he's given you 4 chapters of the thing that you should do. And some of you, if you're listening to this, think, you know what? Maybe I'm in this situation. I've been suffering. I'm going through hardship. And you know what? I know the way that I've been trying to handle it is through my own wisdom, through my own effort, through my own planning. And James is saying, that's not the way you should handle this. Submit to the Lord. Walk with the Spirit. Look to your position in Christ. Don't look to what the world can offer. You could plan all you want and get out of this suffering that way, but look to the Lord and what He's directing you to do. You know in your heart of hearts and in your spirit what it is that God's calling you to do. We might try to rationalize it. Oh, but if I just do this and I do that, I can get out. And Jesus, I'll be right back. I'll come back to you, but I got to do this right now to get out of the suffering. And James is saying, if you know the right thing to do and you don't do it, that's a sin of omission. And it's a pretty serious thing. So let us go back and we'll go into chapter 5. And I just want to wrap up and tie this right into the beginning chapter part of 5. Because again, James is talking about our wealth, pursuing wealth, making plans and hatching plans to try to get out of hardships and making lots of money. And this is where James is going to get his most harsh and his most angry. He almost goes into like Old Testament prophet mode in his denunciation. So if you feel like James is definitely leaning into being anti-rich throughout the whole book, hey, your wealth is going to flounder away. The rich man is going to fade away in his pursuits. The rich person should look to his low position, his position in Christ that maybe he doesn't value as much. He says, God's chosen the poor to be rich in spirit. You shouldn't favor rich people and think that they're... so he's kind of sprinkled all the way through. He takes off the gloves at this point and he just goes full Old Testament prophet. He says, "Come now, you rich, weep and cry aloud over the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your clothing have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and their rust will be a witness against you. It will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you've hoarded your treasure. Look, the pay you have held back from the workers who mowed your field cries out against you, and the cries of the reaper have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived indulgently and luxuriously on the earth. You have fattened your heart in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person, although he does not resist you." So, the gloves are off at this point. James is in no way siding with the rich. And what I think is, why does he just transition into this harsh language on the rich? He was just talking about, hey, don't try to make these plans to try to wealth your way out of suffering. If I can say that, that's really a word, but to try to connive your way out of, don't put God on the back burner so you can pursue your wealth and try to get out of suffering that way. The reason I think that he then just completely dives down into this judgment on the rich. And again, what is the problem with the rich? I think the problem with the rich is typically I say, not always, to get to be wealthy, you have to sell part of yourself to this world system to get there. Again, I'm generalizing, but just think about this logically. I was just talking with a person the other day about this. Satan is the god of this world. Scripture tells us that. He is the cosmocrator. He is the god of this world system. And Satan has set this world system up for nothing good for Christian. He has set this world up to keep people from coming to know Christ and to marginalize and disrupt people in their walk with God, to completely disenfranchise them and to wipe them out in their walk with God. Nothing good comes from Satan. So if he's the ruler of this world and you find yourself on the path to gaining success in gaining prestige, in gaining wealth, which usually wealth comes with as you move up the ladder of prestige within this world system. And you become more at home with this world system. And you become more secure in this world system. You start to be rewarded with wealth. It's just the way a capitalist system works. As you move further and further into it, you're rewarded more with wealth. Is it having all of the money that is the problem? Not so much as what you might have had to do to get there. So if you start with just this attitude of, you know what, I'm just trying to make a little bit of extra money here, so we've got these plans to do this and that, and we've orchestrated this, and we've got this business deal here, and you've never consulted God, you're not thinking, God, what do you actually want in all this? Is this really what you want me to be doing? Do that for a year. Live that way for a year, where you live out your plans of how you're going to make money and do business here or there without concern to God. You might find at the end of that year, it's a little bit harder to go back and say, okay, now I'm going to recharge and get back connected to God. The next year, what if you do it again? And maybe you're a little bit more wealthy at the end of that year. You get another promotion. You get more prestige. It might be a little bit harder to come back and say, okay, God, now what do you have for me? So you do it a third year, and then a fourth year, and then a fifth, and then 20 years down the line, I've seen it personally. People end up so far from the Lord, it kind of scares me again, because I know what goes on in my mind, and I know how easily my thinking will shift away from the Lord, and I'm just so grateful that I have a community and a church that, absent that, I don't know where I would be. But my exhortation to you is, don't think that you can become something in this world, set God on the back burner, and say, God, I'll check back in with you once I've accomplished these plans that I've made. Don't think that you can do that and trade away a part of yourself to the world system, receive lots of money, and then say, now I'm going to just bless people with everything that God has provided. It typically does not work that way. And you're playing a real gamble with yourself, with your family, if you've got a family, if you're trying to do that. So, all that to say, James goes into this rant against the rich. And it's just so foolish to pursue wealth. Why? Because he says things like, your riches are going to be moth-eaten. You know, Jesus says, why store up treasure where the moths are going to destroy it and things are going to just rot away? Store up treasures in heaven. He says, instead, you've hoarded up treasures in the last days. He's saying, like, it's the last days. We're nearing the end. Like, it's not time to be investing in this world system. These things aren't going to be here for very long. So, in this language, you know, it's going to consume your flesh like fire. I really think this language that he's using is saying, like, that the stuff that we have invested in, all of these plans that, again, we might have these good intentions that, hey, I don't want to be suffering anymore. I don't want to be struggling anymore. So we concoct all of these plans on how to become something in the world system. And James is saying those things are going to then be a testimony against you. The heartache, I mean, in the most generous reading, that heartache and that pain, whatever that's going to feel like when we stand before Christ, to realize, you know, there were so many people in my life who didn't know Christ, but I was so concerned with orchestrating my plans around things not related to God. I'm thinking about how to get the next promotion and how to get a high-paying job and now all my money, it's rusted away, it's melted away, and it's like, you know, this burning. It's like a judgment against me. And like when Paul says to the Thessalonians, he says, who is my crown and who is my reward? Like, what are my wealth? What's my wealth when I'm standing before Christ? He says, is it not you Thessalonians? You're the wealth. So when Jesus says, store up treasures in heaven, he's not just saying, like, memorize Bible verses so God will give you gold stars in heaven. The people are the reward. The people are the treasure. And if our mind becomes so preoccupied with the world system, then in the end of days, our money is going to be rotted away. It's going to be burning our flesh. Our clothes will be moth-eaten. Our houses will be burned down. And it's just going to be rubble. And then we're going to say, like, where is my wealth? What do I have? Nothing, because you were too concerned with your plan, not with the plan of God. So, and then he says the real harsh thing, that it's the rich people. You have lived indulgently and luxuriously on the earth. You have fat in your hearts. And he also says you've held back your pay from your workers. So Again, somebody who becomes very wealthy in this world, a lot of the times they get it by pushing people out of the way, cheating people. I mean, again, it's the world system. It's a system run by Satan. If you're going to become something in this world, that's why we often think like, this World Economic Forum where these like rich elites go over to like Davos, Switzerland, and they're plotting and planning. We're often like, how many Satan worshiping parties are going on with these people? Because we think you could not be invited to Davos for this World Economic Forum and not have sold your soul to Satan. I mean, that's bad stuff. So it's like, it's not that going to that thing was evil. It's like what you had to do, how many people you had to sacrifice along the way to get it. So it's like, God's not ignoring that. All of that wages and stuff, all the people you've ripped off and burned down and pilfered and pillaged to get to where you are, that's you're not getting away with anything. So you've condemned and murdered the righteous person, although he does not resist you. So James could have in mind, like, you're condemning and murdering righteous people. He could mean like you've murdered Christ, the righteous person, and he didn't resist you. So it's like, wealthy, who was it that killed Christ? I mean, now I know on a theological level, like we all played a role in that, but our sin is what nailed Christ to the cross. But James is probably just thinking, just a few years after this happened, he's like, who is it that killed my brother again? Oh yeah, it was the wealthy people. It was the rulers and the generals and the governors, Herod and Pilate and the Pharisees and the religious leaders. It was all the wealthy people. Like, their plans are what killed the righteous person, and their plans are the ones that are persecuting James's audience. So he probably has a very low tolerance for these wealthy people. So again, it's not that wealth is inherently wrong. And this, I always say this because when I speak to people who live in America and are very wealthy, we get very defensive. Well, there's nothing wrong with money. There's nothing wrong with having money. I know that. But just think of what Jesus says. The deceitfulness of money, the deceitfulness of wealth is the thorns that choke out fruit in the parable of the soils. So maybe if when we hear these messages and these passages about the dangers of wealth and we immediately get defensive, there's nothing wrong with making money, maybe that's a sign that we've already taken a little bit of the lure and maybe that hook is already set. So I would just encourage you, if you hear that and you immediately recoil thinking, there's nothing wrong with this, or, just take a minute before the Lord and think, Lord, have I already been suckered by the world system? It's not a devastating thing. James says if you lack wisdom, turn to God, he'll give it to you. So you can just right now just say, God, have I been acting foolishly? I want to know if I'm doing the right thing. And just start seeking wisdom. And God will reveal it. So that's my challenge to you. That's my encouragement to you. It's my exhortation to you. Parents with kids, you can start them young, pursuing the Lord, factoring the Lord into your plans, really asking what he wants for your life. And then we as adults, it's never too late to start and to make that turn and to say, okay, God, maybe I've made a mess of things. Yeah, maybe. Maybe I'm way down the path of having made a mess of things, but there's something that you can do right now to turn around and start back down that path of saying, okay, God, I want to see my life restored, and I want to, going forward, start making my plans in alignment with your word and your wisdom and your spirit. So that would be my encouragement to you. Again, if you enjoy this these teachings in these podcasts, you can support me. The ticker's right across the bottom of the screen. You can support me financially, but you can support me, again, just by listening, sharing, shooting me an email to encourage me, saying, hey, I listened to this. It really spoke to me. All of those things really help. But I hope it's blessing you. I hope you appreciate it, and I hope you're getting some value from these teachings. So have a good one, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks. While Faith in Focus is a ministry of InFaith, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of InFaith as a mission.